Well, welcome to part two of the subject on the gap between African Americans and Indigenous Africans. I'm very grateful to have three people of the four people that I summoned to be a part of this video be here today in different parts of the United States, some of them very early for them. So, Dr. Darif Jameson, say hello.
Hey, peace, y'all. Yeah, I'm Dr. Jaref Jameson. Hey.
Longtime DC area educator, Mr. Kenneth Ward. Say
Hey,
hello.
thanks for having me here, sister. Thank
My
you for having me here.
pleasure. And Dr. Anton House from Howard University.
Peace and love to the motherland.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. So let's just generally start off with the general question of what do you each think contributed to the wide gap that currently exists between African Americans and Indigenous Africans? Any of you can start.
Okay,
Anton House?
well, one of the things that I would think that has led to this large gap is most African Americans do not understand or had not really appreciated ethnicity in the way in which it is in Africa, right? Because in the United States, we've always saw ourselves as a race. And until 1965, with the restructuring of the immigration bill that African Americans fought alongside with their civil rights legislation, which allowed Africans to come back into the United States, we began to see people from Africa coming to America, where African Americans have been the only Africans for generations. Therefore, having this meeting of individuals. Now, following the 1960s, many African Americans identified with cultural nationalism, and therefore they saw themselves and as a part of the larger African community, a part of this larger fraternity of African peoples. However, when they came in contact with some Africans did not identify as a race. They identified as their religion or their ethnic group, in which some African Americans were probably thrown off by this, not understanding that, Africa is a vast continent with millions of people that speak different languages, that have different ethnicities, that have different religious interpretations and everything. So in a simple form, how Europeans had generalized Africa as being a blanket statement for all Africans, African Americans adopted that as well. So when they met one person from Africa, they assumed they were representative of all Africa and not understood the large diversity that is within Africa.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you for that.
And Anton,
Dr. Darif?
if I could build a little bit on Anton's piece, I like that in that what I hear you saying is that enslavement, colonization, white supremacy created like this diaspora, right? And out of diaspora, we come up with this idea of race, right? Because before that, we had these ethnic groups and these different culture groups. So I think that part of it is that internalization of, in terms on both sides of the water, both sides of the Atlantic, throughout the diaspora, we've both been miseducated on who we are, where we come from. And I think that ahistorical understanding is what creates, part of that gap. So here's like this gap or this diaspora that's created for whatever reason. And then we meet back together, like you just said, with these different understandings of culture and of race. So I think that's a key point. Yeah.
But also to add to that, when we think about Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba, Paul Robeson, these individuals that was trying to lead this larger understanding of Black African peoples and connected throughout the world, Fela Kuti, eventually there is a plan by the CIA and an MI6 to disrupt this. And this miseducation or this friction that's developed, we can also attribute to those individuals who aided the CIA and MI6 were getting rid of some of these African leaders who was trying to create this relationship with the African diaspora and bringing these people of African descent back to Africa and create this network, because we know that the Cubans with South Africa, how they were able to help in the Guinea-Bissau in order for this liberation to take place and apartheid to be kicked out. So we know it was there, but there was some interference and I honestly believe those individuals who we do end up meeting with, some of them have either been a part of the State Department's plan to undermine this liberation, or they do not know, because what us African Americans have, we have institutions or popular culture that constantly remind us that our descendants, our ancestors came from Africa.
There's so many layers of that speaks to some of the things that you're saying. It's like a concerted effort, right? During the research on this topic, I even learned that the Department of Immigration would tell indigenous Africans during their interviews, stay away from the African Americans until you get your processes. And so if you get too involved with them, you may not even get your citizenship, so then they kind of perpetuate that theory of stay away from them. You're not one of them. You know what I mean? So that's one of the things. But one of the things that you just noted was makes me think of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was one of those leaders that saw the indigenous Africans and African Americans, all Africans, Caribbeans, everywhere they may be, as one group and wanted to unify them, right? And then you see what happened to his efforts.
Exactly.
And so I was going to jump in and say, I was going to jump in and say, you see what happened to him, right? But I think even before that, I think there's an intentionality by Europeans to marginalize or to discredit the African or the African roots of civilization. So I think that there's that stealing of that stealing of history, that pillaging and stuff like that happens, because then you can justify slavery, right? So I think that was this whole piece to marginalize Black folks or Africans. So then you can justify everything that they did, like they were beasts. They sold them like, animals and stuff like that. So you take their God, you take their language, you take everything. And so you can make them this subhuman or this other thing other than human. And one of the most interesting things, like even when you look back, like the chattel slavery, like one of the key tenets of that was the enslaved Africans didn't know their birthdays. And so when you can take away the very things that humanize us, then you can create this subclass. So in that, then you raise up a group of folk and you miseducate them, and then you teach them that, they're somehow superior to folks who are on the continent. And then the folks on the continent get fed this diet because they were colonized as well. They get fed this diet of videos and misinformation about Blacks in America. And it's so much so that it still exists, and all of the things that you talked about. And it is a concerted effort to keep us divided, because the riches are on the continent. That's where the riches are. So and the ingenuity and stuff like that. And I think that spirit of liberation and that spirit of we can do it is embodied in the Black American. Because if you look at all of the things that we've overcome and the things that we continue to do, I think we are that story of folks who don't give up. And those stories those people who ascend regardless of what the obstacles are against us. So I think that's a big piece of it.
Right. Dorothy, Dr. Jameson, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I love where this is going. So I'm thinking, based on everything we've been talking about so far, this idea, this historical memory. And so our historical memory has been distorted. And by historical memory, like what story is told, right? Why is it told? What function does that story serve? And I think I was thinking about this book of The Ties That Bind. And in The Ties That Bind, he talks about African American consciousness of Africa. And within that, he has this quote by Hegel, and I'm paraphrasing, but Hegel was like, let us leave this Africa because it has nothing to offer to the world, right? It has no contribution to offer. So if Hegel, this famous European philosopher of history, right? And if Hegel says, let us leave this Africa, which has nothing to offer to the world, on both sides, like we've been saying, we've both been taught that Africa has nothing to offer to the world. And once we internalize that. So it's almost like if you had like I tell students, like there's the potluck and everybody brings their contribution to the potluck, right? So we got potato salad, we got fried chicken, we got bringing all these type of things. And so if me and my wife used to just bring water. And so if you're just bringing water like that, we could bring out ourselves, dude. We don't need you to bring that to the party. So what I'm saying is that within those historical contributions, that means that if people view you as not bringing a contribution to the world, then they can leave you out of the table of humanity when we come down to meet and to sit down and commune. So I think that historical memory that y'all been hitting on is like a major part, and that's impacted both of us.
Right.
So
It's interesting though that you talk about this historical memory. I think about as a child growing up in North Carolina, when we ever talked about going someplace that was really, really far away, my grandmother would say, "That's all the way in Timbuktu."
Right.
My grandmother had never been taught about the greatness of Timbuktu, but that Timbuktu collective history, man, was passed down by the enslaved Africans and continued into the 1900s, that my grandmother, who didn't have a formal education, had never been taught about Timbuktu, would recount Timbuktu. Of course, I would go on to study about the greatness of Timbuktu and connect it and have one of those aha moments. And then fast forward to a couple of years ago, I'm on the continent with some of my students from DC. The kid asked him, "So what kind of gun do you own?" My kid says to me, "Hey, Mr. Ward, listen to this. And he tells the African brother, we're in Senegal, "Ask me again." And the kid says, "What kind of gun do you own?" So the supposition was not that you did or did not have a gun. You had a gun.
Right.
What kind do you have? Because that's his image of young Black boys in America. And I tried to explain to him as best as I could that my student, Michael, his weapon of choice was his mind.
Right.
Michael likes to read, so that's his weapon. He doesn't need a gun. He has that. And we can argue about whether or not we need a gun in present day America. That's another conversation.
Firm supporter.
So,
Right, but
so
Michael didn't have a gun, right? But this Senegalese kid, his version of a young, teen, in DC, you would have a gun. So there's that propaganda on both sides, and it is intentional to keep us separated.
Is that intentionality heavier on one side over the other, or do you think it's somewhat balanced?
I believe it's somewhat balanced because, the older generations of African Americans, they were taught that Africa was Tarzan movies, right? In a large part. Here you have this white man who's not indigenous to Africa, but he could speak to all the animals, and the indigenous people, they only mumbled and talked unintelligently.
Yeah.
But you had those Harlem Renaissance writers and intellectuals that pushed back on that, and I don't even think African Americans really bought in that, because when you honestly think about it, especially for African American folk culture and music, when you study African indigenous religion, one of the only African deities to survive in African American culture whole is Papa Legba. Because if you ever study the story of Robert Johnson, who went to the crossroads and who sold his soul to become a better musician, the crossroads is a story that's primarily of African origin. So it's this substratum, even though it might not be outwardly and consciously observed, that's continuing to resonate throughout African American folk culture, history, and play a large part in music and popular culture. So when looking at the imagery, then we get the beast of no nations, the young people walking around with guns and these child armies.
Yeah,
but
so
then they get New Jack
basically
City from us.
Both sides
Right.
are basically being taught in both indirect and direct ways that
That we're
you're
dangerous.
superior to them, they're inferior than you. So having grown up in Washington, D.C., I've always I can relate to the African American culture. I have a lot of African American friends, and that's what I know. To be Black is to be an African American in the United States, right? And I also have my Somali native culture. So I can see on the other side some of the things that go on in people's minds and some of the things that they say. So clearly, my understanding is African Americans see themselves as more evolved, more superior than the Africans, because they have this concept of Africans as being, not really educated, coming from poor backgrounds, starving nations, blah, blah, blah. And then the indigenous Africans see Africans as owning guns, like like Kenneth Ward said, gangsters, no family unit, all that. So both sides have these negative conceptions of themselves and see themselves as superior to the other. That's the irony of this, right?
So Ayan, I know you're the interviewer, but can I ask you real quick? How did you balance that? Like, so these images of, I know these African Americans, Africans. I have experiences with them.
I've always
And
been
then I have
outspoken.
this other voice that's saying that this image, this stereotype of who these people are. So how did you navigate that space as far as when we're talking about these different perceptions?
Well, for me, I can kind of, now being an adult, when I was younger, I always thought, what's wrong with them? Why would they think that way? But now I haven't been involved myself and educated, right? I can see that from one side, from the indigenous African side, I have to explain things to them. So wait a minute, you're no different. You're no different. You're straight out of Africa. Here you are looking down on African Americans who had no choice. The only difference between you and them is the fact that you know your ancestors and they don't, or they know to a particular degree.
Period.
Right.
Yeah.
And then especially in high school, the African Americans, some of the cliques, I was a part of the nerd clique, right? But some of the cliques that were African American sisters, they liked me, but they never saw me as another African American. I'm like, I'm straight out of Africa. How do you not see me as Black? I'm more Black than you.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so
But the
that kind of
educational
thing. So
system
I've
on
always been
both sides.
outspoken and to question and say what was on my mind about the situation. So that's how I.
The educational systems, Ayan, though, on both sides are skewed because I talk to kids in Elmina. There's a huge slave castle right there, or a place where they enslaved the Africans, because I think it's calling a slave castle is a really interesting term. But
Yeah.
it's there, and they haven't been inside. They don't know that history.
No.
And then I look at Black folk in Southeast DC. They pass by Frederick Douglass's house. They don't know that history.
Yes.
So it's intentional to keep people blind, and then they will buy into the lies about 5G and all these other things that they can tell you because you just really don't have any context for truths. And I think that when you can deny a man his history and his path, I mean, you can direct that man to do almost anything. I think about taking like students to the continent, and I've been doing it now for over 20 years. And I just remember the early days, like some of the questions that they ask kids. They're asking kids the same questions 20 years later, just ridiculous stuff like, well, where do you stay? What do you eat? I've had kids who come and we're at the airport and I'm like, why is your suitcase so heavy? They've packed water because someone told them you can't bring the water. So they're bringing water from the US. So there's that type of miseducation. And we've had training, we've had different conversations, but the parents are insisting that you take water with you. Because again, they've been so miseducated and stuff like that. The most recent trip right before COVID, I took a group of 10 really successful Black folk. 4 of them right now talking about trying to buy property in Ghana to move there because it changed their entire perspective. One of them, my sister, is living there right now. So for me, the answer or the opportunity is to expose folks to the continent and to have honest conversations with people on the continent about the insanity that happens in America. Because the brothers that hit me up, I want to come to America. I want to come to America. And my question always is, why? Why? Because if you're looking at getting rich and imitating what you see in the movies and the videos and stuff like that, that's not real America. Right now, like all of my friends, we're in lockdown. The stress, the anxiety right now dealing with COVID has been just inexplicable over the last year. They're not dealing with that. My buddies in Ghana, they're at the beach still. So there's some differences that they don't get about living in America, and especially being Black in America. And I think with George Floyd and some of the other things that have happened, they're seeing that being Black in America puts you in this precarious situation. And so I'm trying to get them to have conversations about how do you develop Accra? How do you develop Kumasi? How do you do things in your country to develop it as opposed to relying upon Europeans or folks from North Africa coming in and doing that development? Because that's what's happening in a lot of the places. And even the Chinese. Like the Chinese are there, like in full force, raping.
So Kenneth, so with the Ghana piece, I'm wondering, like, why do you think Ghana centers itself as like this space where we see all these different type of diasporic exchanges? So Ghana with like the cultural exchange, the double citizenship, those type of things. So I'm wondering, like, why do you think Ghana? How does Ghana play into that?
So it's interesting that Anton says in Nkrumah, I say W.B. Du Bois. I say W.B. Du Bois, right? Because Du Bois went there to advise. He took the brilliance of America and he went there like, yo, I'm going to help you develop this, right? So he goes there. And I've taken kids there, brother, and it's really discerning to me because I had this one kid. We're there. We go to his house. He's standing at the bus. He's seen the coffin. I mean, he's seen it. He comes back to the U.S. He's at one of the top academic high schools in DC. He's having a conversation with his professor, and he says, I went to Dubos's house in Ghana. And the teacher says to him, no, Dubose didn't live in Ghana. The kid hits me up like, Mr. Ward, didn't we go to Dubos's house? At this point, I'm angry at the kid. I'm like, why are you questioning yourself? You know you were there. You took pictures beside his wife's ashes. Why are you questioning yourself? Don't allow anyone to make you question what you know to be fact. So to go back to your point, I think that Ghana, number one, has great tourism, right? They got great tourism, but they had folks like Nkrumah, they had folks like Dubose who laid that foundation. And even when Nkrumah when he was overthrown by the US government, that's stuff that our kids don't know. So when our kids go there and they learn that type of history, they're like, whoa, I never knew this. Right, you're not taught that in our schools. You're not taught that.
Relationship, though, right?
Yeah, the other piece too,
I'm sorry.
They speak English. They speak English. So there's an ease there because I love Senegal.
Okay.
And I take the kids to Senegal for a couple of years. The kids, when we go to Senegal, they don't speak Wolof, they don't speak French. There's some folks in Senegal who speak English as well. So they have a harder time of communicating with them. You go to Ghana, you can plop down and Accra, Elmina, Kumasi, wherever, they can communicate with folk. And they form these relationships that are amazing. And I just sit back and watch and just marvel at how the universe sort of plays it out, man. But it's been really life-changing for my students. Students have come back and told me it changed their life. I got a kid, Sanjay. Sanjay hit me up. He's like, Mr. Ward, I was flirting with the streets. You believed in me. You took me to Ghana. It changed my life. So I think it's those types of experiences that we need to invest in as people. And Ayan, you know, this is something that's passionate, you know, for me. I think that one of the things that we need to do with Black kids in this country is they need to get a passport.
Yes.
They need to spend some time on the continent, and it tears down all of the lies that you've been told. But more importantly, you see yourself in a different light. Because prior to going to Senegal for the very first time in my early 20s, I had seen myself as this very flat, unidimensional person. Going there changed my relationship with Black men. It changed the way that I saw myself. It changed everything. It was the most liberating experience that I ever had. I had that in my 20s.
Okay, so
now if I'd had that at 14 or at 10, life would have been even better. But I even remember being an undergrad, wanting to do a study abroad at the University of in Togo, in Lomé. No one nurtured that. And when I said I want to go to Lomé and study this exchange program, people were like, what? Why are you going there?
Where's that?
And so I didn't go. Right. Why are you going there? And so I didn't go. So now this is one of the reasons why I take kids abroad. Like, you need to go. This is going to change your life. It'll give you a different perspective. They go there, they have real world experiences. We go inside businesses. We went into the corporate affiliate for KPMG. So the kids go into the space thinking like, people are poor. We're coming to help someone. We're coming to say, no, that's not what we're doing. Yeah. You're coming here so you can see that they're whole. They're whole. They're businesses. There's poverty. But there's also poverty in DC.
Yeah.
And I remind the kids when we're walking around and you see people on the streets who are like poor or you know, whatever, you see that in DC.
Yeah.
So this is nothing that you've never seen before.
Yeah.
This is nothing that you've never seen before. And a lot of you, if you lived here, you would be some of these kids on the street. So because in DC, you have some safety nets that they don't have here.
Right.
So trying to get them to connect with people in a different light, man. That's been a big
and it's part of the education process you put your students through. Now, the three of you are educators. You're educators on this very topic, various topics dealing with Africana, right? And people of the African diaspora, whether in Africa or any part of the world like the United States. So my question to you, each individually, why do you think there's a lack of education about the continent of Africa in the school systems, even on the college level? Like there's no class on the college level or even being taught or discussed during African American Month in public schools even, that teaches them about pre-colonialism. You may learn a little bit here and there about Egypt and Egyptians and so forth, but it is a huge continent. I mean, most people don't even know that in a little country of Benin, women were warriors for hundreds of years, women, you know what I mean? So there's so many interesting things, and that there's a larger wall than the Great Wall of China. And everyone thinks the Great Wall of China is the largest one. It's not. You know, there's so many things. And the fact that so many natural remedies, so many things that have been taken from Africa and sold into the Western societies came from Africa. So none of this is known by African Americans or to the general public. So again, I come back to my question to each of you as educators: why isn't African knowledge or studies being taught in African schools? Even Malcolm X said himself in one of his speeches, the elevation of the African American really boils down to them knowing more about Africa. So why is
I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam, but Farrakhan said something that encapsulate this issue. He said, if they won't treat you right, what makes you think they will teach you right?
Mm.
It's the same reason why the average African American doesn't know anything about Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the Haitian Revolution. Mm-hmm. That if you begin to identify those successful attempts and the success that Africans and people of African descent have had in throwing off the yoke of oppression, mm-hmm. And also rallying around themselves, utilizing their indigenous beliefs, their know-how, their ideas, but also at the same time perfecting the tools that you gave to them, you become a threat to their whole society and their civilization. Therefore, to keep individuals disorganized, ununified, as well as strangers to one another, it allows for the system and Western societies to undermine, and the proverbial African proverb, play each other like the two cats and the monkey. Mm-hmm. That you go to one side and say something, you go to the other side and say something, and then when you look up, the cheese is gone. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what they've been doing to us for generations. I believe the onus is on us. Mm-hmm. The responsibility is on us. I always theorized a reverse triangle trade, that we have the raw materials in Africa. We have the market in the United States. We have the rich, beautiful climate of the Caribbean to grow crops. Why aren't we working together in order to stimulate trade, business, and markets amongst ourselves in order to raise up and inform and educate our people? Then we will have the NGOs to return to these different spaces where there are Black people, to educate them on each other so that we can work in unison. Mm-hmm. We're all connected, from a Black person in Brixton to a Black person in France to the Black people in Bahia. We're all connected to the same historical truth and reality that we are people of African descent. However, it's the nation state identities that some identify with, as well as the power structure that's keeping us from unifying and coming together for the liberation of us all.
Yeah, even the colonization divided up each country inside with tribalism. Okay, on the same question, we have about 15 more minutes. Darif Jameson, Dr. Darif?
Yeah, just real quick. I love what Anton said and where we've been going. And I'm thinking about Robin D.G. Kelly, and he talks about the Black radical imagination. So this Black radical imagination, and part of that is tied into this historical memory that we've been talking about. So the Black radical imagination means that I can imagine those things because I know the potential and possibility of African people. Mm-hmm. But if I don't think there's the potential and possibility of African people, then I can't even imagine different possibilities and how that ties into action. So I think that what we've been talking about, it really ties back into us reimagining this Black radical imagination, reimagining what it means for Black folks to put them, or Africans, to put themselves into history and to act as like these historical actors. So yeah, I know we're running out of time, but just real quick on that one, that's what I was thinking about, this radical imagination and how that theory leads to praxis, mm-hmm. and how that impacts our lived experiences. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
For me, it's so much, to unpack. And I just sort of think about, as Black folks in America, like the majority of us, we still have the last name of our slave owners. Mm-hmm. So just stopping right there, like the majority of us, we still have the last name of our slave owners. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to a disconnect, we're totally disconnected. Mm-hmm. We live in a world where things that are Black, there's this disdain, there's continued, and we just see our personhood just continuously disrespected. We see the uprising that happened in DC on January 6th. Had those been Black folk, they would have been slaughtered. So we see it, and so our lives continuously are told that they don't matter, which I think why, you people talk about like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. Like, we've got to make our lives matter. And it can't be in slogan, it can't be in t-shirts and stuff like that, but it has to be very radical stuff like teaching our truths.
Right.
Because when you talk about like triangular trade, the average Black person that I've come across, and we would do something in class, like when we're teaching this, I would have the kids to go home and we would say, ask 3. You ask 3 people, what is this thing? And just get answers from them. The majority of the folks don't know. So you're talking about folks who have been cut. They have been cut from and their history starts with slavery. So when you talk to Black folks in America, a lot of us, we think, well, we were slaves. And not even understanding that there were free people. There was Timbuktu. There were all of these other places and stuff like that. You're talking about people who were enslaved.
Okay.
And when you sort of look at any of the history and stuff like that, they talk about the fact that the freed African that they had captured was so hard to enslave because they knew freedom. And I just contend that in 2021, our folk don't know freedom. Our folk don't really know what it is to be radical. They don't know what it is to really value their lives. They don't know what it is to go into a store and expect good service or to be served in the same manner that other folks are served, to show up into places and feel like you belong. We still got kids going on college campuses who come back telling me that, people trying to make them feel like they don't belong there.
Yeah.
We got kids who go to, we got kids though, seriously, who go to Ghana, who see this place. They go to Dubosa's house, they come back and they're made to believe that what they saw is wrong, or they somehow are incorrect, So I think that there's this assault on what we know as truths. And I think that we're seeing this play out in the media.
Why is that? Why is this concerted effort, both on the diaspora of Africans in Africa and African Americans,
to keep white supremacy
going?
I mean, it's white supremacy.
What is it with us that's such a threat to them? They must know something we don't know. So what is
it's white supremacy? If you really understand who you are and your value, there's no way that white supremacy will continue to exist.
And also, as Claude Anderson said, racism is a competition between groups of people, meaning with wealth and the hoarding of resources and materials, technology, and other properties. Now, if I develop a system in which I place myself on top and I present this life that's better for you, if you are intelligent, because that's why Africa has a brain drain. Since if I am intelligent and the H-1B1 visa, and I can go to the West and get a job making top dollar for whatever I'm good at, I am removing myself from adding on to the intellectual development of my nation state. Also, if I become educated and understand how this system works, I could eventually move back and say, hey, maybe it was okay if Gaddafi would have created this United States of Africa banking cert. Maybe that would have aided in the economic development of Africa that would probably extend it to the diaspora.
As much as poverty that exists on the continent, it's still the richest continent on the planet with the resources. So if you get all the intelligent people together, if there's a unity amongst people of the Africa diaspora everywhere, no words. You know what I could say, but I'm
look at how people are giving guns. You look at who gives the guns. Look at how people are pitted against one another. We can look at what happened in Rwanda, but we can look at what's happening in current day, just across the continent, like how people are pitted against each other and stuff like that. And it's by design. I mean, this is no accident. And it's the same thing in our neighborhood.
What can be done? As my last question to the three of you, what are some things that can be done on both sides of the fence of this divided bridge between Indigenous Africans and African Americans to keep narrowing that gap? I don't think it's something that can happen pretty quickly because there's so many layers of efforts that keep the two sides apart. I mean, educated ones like the three of us, the frustration just kind of builds and we want to do everything we can to change that, but we can't do it alone. What are some other things that can be done?
I think digital, we're having conversations, right? Yeah. Technology's everywhere. Like I see the kids in Accra, they got cell phones, they got Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So fostering these conversations is healthy. I think that's a start, like having these conversations. But I also think it takes more of getting folk from here to go there to see. And you see the opportunities, you see chances for development. Stevie Wonder just relocated to Ghana, right? So I think that you have these opportunities for folks to see that there's a life outside of what you know and what you're taught, because you're taught America's number one, USA number one. And you think that this is the only place where you can live and have Wi-Fi and running water and Coca-Cola or whatever.
And it is number one in many ways, but you can thrive and quickly become a millionaire even quicker if you're educated. If you're Black and educated from wherever, if any of you came to Africa and started a little business, you'd be surprised how fast it would grow. I started my little coffee business and it's already moving.
I think even too, but I think even more so than like, you know, financial, and certainly you need financial freedom or independence, but peace of mind.
Yeah.
Like when I'm running around Ghana, like I don't worry about someone shooting me. Like I don't worry about the police stopping me. Yeah. Like I don't worry about like white supremacists or the Proud Boys and stuff like that. When I travel through different parts of the US, like I think about that type of stuff. Like I'm traveling from North Carolina to DC. I'm like, yo, I don't want to travel at night because I don't want to have to stop and charge my car at this remote location. Yeah, so I need to wait until the morning to go, you know, those kinds of things.
And the major thing that gets eliminated is there's no more profiling when you come back to the content of Avatar.
Service is bad. It's not because you're Black.
Also, I believe
there's no judgment here. There's no judgment here. I mean, I could walk with a scarf on my head with mismatched socks and walk into the most stately of places and still get good service. There's no judgment in Africa.
No peer pressure?
No, not in my experience. So.
But then also, I wonder about like.
Go ahead.
I still wonder about like the global, because part of in the Predicting of Blackness, she talks about looking how race still exists in Ghana. So using Ghana as that example, right? Mm-hmm. So if white supremacy is global, after enslavement, colonization, all those, then race still creeps into the mix. Absolutely. And I think what happens is sometimes is that here for African Americans or Black Americans, it gets like you're so focused on race. But no, if white supremacy is global, then it impacts everywhere, and we internalize that in those spots as well. And something that with Kenneth, I just wanted to bring, I know we're supposed to be on solutions, but I thought about that term in Ghana, what's that, Akata? So there's like this term, Akata, like this negative term for like Black Americans, and even Black American, like not African American, but Black American, like you're Black, you're not tied in with Africa. But this idea of this negative pejorative term, Akata, put forth towards African Americans. And I think that somewhere in there, as far as I guess the solution, is that it has to be on both sides. But I think that we still experience a lot of that from what is that on the African part, right? Continental Africans, indigenous Africans, as Jan says, how does that tie into perceptions of African Americans? And we have to hit that at the bud. And a lot of that has to deal with, which we haven't touched on, is enslavement. So the silence and or the shame around all those different dynamics. So when we're at that so-called castle, right? Like how do we deal with who are the players? How does it work? And I think that's the core, that's like a core center of how we try to work through some of that. We have to go to that slave dungeon and work our way out from there.
I want to interject because I had spoke with someone about that term Akata, and they had told me that Akata meant a cat, right? And they were referencing, the terms come from a reference to a speech that Malcolm X did about if you put a cat in the oven, biscuits don't come out. And referencing that just because African Americans are born in the West, they're still Africans. And somehow that term was turned into something that was negative. But in the beginning, Akata, which was taken within the context of these individuals, they may be in the West, but they are of African origin. Right. So that was my interpretation and understanding the word. But as we know with history and the evolution of semantics and terminology, that it may have started off as something good and was transformed into something negative following the generations, especially since Malcolm lived in the 60s. And we know CIA, MI6, the overthrow of conscious Black Africans who wanted to go to the United Nations to say, hey, stop treating our brothers this way, because as dignitaries, we get pulled over on the highways in Maryland on our way to DC because we're Black. So this is
go
really
back to-
why John F. Kennedy steps in, because a lot of Africans who are driving down from the United Nations in New York to Washington, D.C. will get pulled over by racist state troopers in Maryland.
So should the
So-
focus be, let's close this up, we have about 5 minutes now left. So should the focus be, one, on education, especially educating the newer generations on not only the problem that exists between the two, so they have a good understanding that this is wrong, one, and what you've learned of the other side is false, two, and three, to get them to see themselves as one. And is there too much focus on the elements of what caused it? Are we putting more energy into that than putting more energy into changing the situation? So can
We can have a convention. We can have a convention at any time.
Mhm.
We all have access to passports, air travels. We can have a convention and come together and create a language, a narrative, a chronology, a system of education and thought in order to reinforce the ideas that we create, describe and identify a language that enhances and uplifts and builds us. So all it takes is a date,
Mhm.
an announcement, a call to action, and an invitation. And I believe the diaspora will show up.
I think it has to be, you have to know that history though. How did we get here? I think you've got to know how you got someplace before you can even look at where you're going. So I think to your point, yeah, people need to be taught that. And I don't think that you go back to place blame, but you go back for an understanding. And I think we need to understand how we got here. I think about some experiences that I've had on the continent that were not positive experiences, right? Because they were colonized as well. And so what I do is the same way that I give people grace here, I give them grace as well. And I understand you don't know any better. And I can't go into the continent, number one, romanticizing, because I've seen so many Black Americans go there, they romanticize Africa, like it is paradise. No, there are problems.
Yeah.
And there are things that with my experiences, I can bring that to the table and listen to them and say, okay, well, this is how I can help you, as opposed to going in and saying, this is what needs to be done. Because I've seen a lot of times, we're going there as though we know more.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you can go to somebody else's house telling them what they need to do in their house. I'm offended when somebody comes over to my house and tell me, oh, you need to do this. You don't need to tell me what I need to do in my house, right? I know what I need to do in my house better than anyone else. So I go into, when I travel, I try and go, number one, just in peace and love, and just open for the experience and allowing myself to show up how they need me as opposed to what I want to do.
Yes.
Because I think so often we go in with our own agenda, like this is what they need. And what you need in DC is not what they necessarily need in Kumasi. So I think sometimes for me, it's just being open and listening, listening to my brothers and sisters.
Very good. Professor Jameson, your closeout?
No, I affirm everything. I say I shade everything the brothers just said. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay.
But I think it's this. I think it's you bringing folks together like this. We got to have these conversations. I think it's beautiful, when I think about some of the conversations that my students have been able to have. And I just stand back, I can facilitate when I need to facilitate, but I just let them go. I just let them do. I take them to the beach and let them meet other African kids so they can have conversations, and specifically Ghanaian kids, so they can have these conversations. As opposed to me saying, when we go to Ghana, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. I took a group of kids to Ethiopia. And I told the kids going in, I said, there's something they do called Bunabet. They do this coffee ceremony. I said, it's one of the most amazing things in the world. I said, and when I was here previously, someone invited me to their home. One night, these guys invited us to their house. The kids are afraid. Mr. Ward, we can't go to their house. We can't. Why? We're safe. Trust. Just trust me. We go to the house. Their little sisters come out. They do the coffee ceremony and stuff like that. It changed my kids.
And
it changed my kids.
So
the whole
we
experience.
need to see more of that.
Who in America does something like that for you? Who does Gersha? Who feeds you in America?
Exactly.
No one's doing this kind of stuff, right?
Hospitality is in abundance, pretty much in every African country that you go to. So,
and me being around that, with your mother and Aisha Abdul Ghani and seeing that beautiful culture in which it's communal and people come together for a purpose, for family, to share food, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the reality is, in the South, it's still alive. People hospitality. Those are Africanness.
Exactly.
And I think, that's another conversation later too. This idea like
we
continuities.
Conversation.
Yeah, the continuities, discontinuities, how the worldview still manifests. So I think that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole nother segment.
Now, if the three of you are willing to continue every once in a while to talk on these subjects moving forward and other topics, would you be willing to?
Of
Absolutely.
course, of
I'm down.
course.
Fantastic.
Any way that we can assist and bridging the gap and being a part of the discussion
Yeah.
to bring us home and to have our brothers and sisters, dialogue and ground with us, like the great
Yes.
Walter Rodney said.
Yeah, grinding with our brothers and sisters. Yes.
So all
indeed.
three of you
Yeah.
provided additional enlightenment, personal experiences, and I love it. And I hope the viewers take away something additionally valuable on the topic matter. Dr. Jameson, thank you so much, all the way from Alabama. Is that where you are? Alabama?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Birmingham, Alabama. Mhm.
Executive Director Kenneth Ward of College Bound in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
DC.
Dr. Anton House, who's
Yeah.
currently in Delaware from Howard University.
HU.
You know,
HU, he's over there teaching at one of the big universities in Wilmington. So thank you.
I need to get some of my kids to audit your classes.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm
We have
at
each other's emails, so please communicate and
Yeah.
connect. And
Yes.
let's do a collective effort and slowly,
Yeah,
step
thank
by
you,
step,
sister.
changing the minds on both sides of the spectrum.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Thank
Love
you.
the three of you.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
Yeah, appreciate you. Thank you so
All right,
much.
love y'all.
Peace.
Bye.
Peace.